the 3rd century AD, the Roman Emperor Gallian encouraged cannabis use, which he thought would make his people happy. In a declining empire, the Romans turned increasingly to the Oriental gods, Mithras and Zoroaster. Christianity was gaining ground, partly because it incorporated elements of these Oriental religions, but not the use of cannabis.
The Roman Empire really went to war on hemp. The Roman Empire provides a very good example of the importance, the strategic importance, one might say, of hemp in any society in history. The Romans had hemp arsenals either side of the Alps. They had one in Ravenna and one in Vienna. And the procurator of hemp was a very important position in the Roman hierarchy. That is not to say that hemp was only used by the Romans to make war with. It had its place in all the aspects of hemp and all the aspects of fibers that you can imagine that it would have, i.e. it figured in clothing, shelter, food, defense, aggression, and medicine.
England has been using hemp as a strategic material for centuries. At the beginning of the 19th century, ropes and sails for ships were exclusively made from hemp, but 90% of this hemp was imported from Italy and Russia. The United Kingdom was seriously worried about maintaining its hemp supplies during the expansion of the Napoleonic Empire. King George III of England decided to increase the cultivation of hemp and to develop its production in the seaports along the south coast of Britain.
There were frequent wars with France, certainly from early medieval times, until, of course, Napoleonic Wars. And Bridport took part in that span of history.
In 1803, the British Navy organised a blockade against France. Napoleon counteracted by signing an agreement with the Tsar Alexander I. This contract was called the Tilsit Treaty, and it especially forbade any export of hemp to England and America, thereby depriving them both of the use of hemp towards their sailcloth, rope, and other hemp products used in the war effort. Despite Napoleon's protests, Alexander I allowed merchants to smuggle hemp to Britain. This is one of the reasons why Napoleon decided to invade Russia. But the severe early winter of 1812 forced him to withdraw his troops and led to the end of his empire.
Bonaparte was almost assassinated by an Egyptian who had taken hashish. That's how our relation with cannabis started, because straight away Napoleon banned cannabis in Egypt. For a long time, there has been this theory in France. You can still hear it sometimes said, that the word assassin is derived etymologically from the word hashishin.
In 1945, Gutenberg printed the first Bible. It was printed on hemp paper. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America and at the same time introduced hemp to the New World. He offered the natives gifts including hemp seeds and cloths. Hemp was used to make sails and rope. Thanks to this crop, France, England, Spain and Portugal could strengthen and increase their maritime power. In 1620, the Mayflower brought the Pilgrims to conquer America. In the hold, it also brought hemp seeds. 100 years later, the first drafts of the American Constitution were written on hemp paper. The same paper was used in 1776 for the Declaration of Independence.
All of a sudden, alcohol was becoming legal again, and all these agents didn't have anything to do. And Harry Anslinger thought, well, we should have a law against hemp, and so did William Randolph Hearst. and so did DuPont. And the three companies got together, and other people claiming the cotton industry joined in to outlaw hemp because it was making a huge comeback. And the reason it was making a huge comeback is that it took 200 to 300 hours to plant, harvest, and make ready for fiber, acre of hemp. But all of a sudden, in the 30s, in the 1930s, that 200 or 300 man-hours per acre went down to 1 man-hour per acre. It was a better fiber than any other fiber and previous hemp fibers. And that was the beginning of the end of all fibers, as being the only synthetic. Nylon was the new synthetic, would have to make way for the reintroduction of hemp as an inexpensive fiber, as well as the strongest, the best, the longest lasting, and the softest fiber. The government of the United States outlawed a fiber and forced the rest of the world to swallow it. They swallowed the outlawing of the #1 fiber on Earth for 10,000 years until the 1930s, and then they outlawed it completely.
China, the hemp country, was part of the Japanese plan for military conquest.
But in official Tokyo, seat of an empire which for nearly a decade has been governed by its stern and ruthless military caste, there is more activity, more secret comings and goings than in many a year. The little men who command the world's third largest navy see in the South Pacific the richest of all colonial prizes. The Philippines, a group of 7,091 Pacific islands which, still under the protection of the U.S. flag, constitute the only major hazard to Japanese plans for new conquest in the war year of 1940. Already one important island industry, the growing and processing of Manila hemp, is almost entirely under Japanese control. And within the past few years, by intensive cultivation, Japanese immigrant farmers have increased production of the one cash crop which has long been a virtual Philippine monopoly.
The invasion of the two big hemp-producing countries, China and Philippines, was the start of hemp rationing. Hitler was also aware of the strategic importance of hemp, which was used in the making of canvas and ropes, both of which were an essential part of his war effort. In 1941, when the German army invaded Russia, it blocked Britain's supply of Russian hemp. Germany managed to develop her own hemp production, but the cultivation of this fiber, which had become so necessary in wartime, was still banned in Great Britain. In 1942, the German troops reached the center of Russia. The land continued to produce hemp, which enabled Hitler to move confidently to the next stage of his plans for the Reich. To safeguard its own supplies of hemp, Great Britain urged India to increase production. Meanwhile, war was spreading to Japan.
Within little more than a year, Japan, successfully employing once again the deceit and treachery which had so well served her in the past, had taken the final desperate plunge.
When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, forcing the United States of America to declare war, Americans realized they were cut off from their hemp supplies. The U.S. Navy was totally dependent upon hemp for rot-resistant ropes for their ships and for many other components. The American government then decided to redevelop their hemp industry. Marijuana was legalized again and farmers received seeds. A propaganda film called Hemp for Victory was then made to encourage this war effort. The Allies' air forces were completely reliant upon hemp. Parachute straps, packs and belts were made out of hemp. No other available fiber was so strong and so reliable under combat conditions. After General MacArthur had forced the Japanese to withdraw from the Philippines, hemp production soon reached pre-war levels again. After the war years, a new world arose from the ashes of the old. India gained independence. Thanks to automation, India doubled its hemp production and increased its exports to America and the rest of the world. In peacetime, the United States once again banned the cultivation of hemp and cannabis, but at the same time imported millions of tons of hemp during the post-war economic boom to supply its industries.
For this is the Port of New York, a sprawling pattern of activity covering more than 1,500 square miles. Its 650-mile waterfront, an ever-changing mirror reflecting the work of the world and its needs and tastes. Grain from Canada, and fish from Portugal and Norway, tires from Akron, and hemp from India.
It seems that knowledge of the psychotropic properties of the plant had been lost, at least as far as official science was concerned. It became a hidden, secret knowledge. Only people who really had a good knowledge of plants and their healing powers continued to use the plant. And having a good knowledge of plants at that time was not generally a good idea, because such people were thought to be witches. They were called witches because they knew about things that ordinary people didn't know about and didn't understand.
In the 16th century in France, François Rabelais, a doctor and writer, wrote surreptitiously about cannabis in his famous book, Gargantua and Pantagruel.
He appreciated cannabis so much that he called it Pantagruelion after his hero Pantagruel. Cannabis, for Rabelais, is Pantagruelion. And this plant has such wonderful properties, as he said, that if plants were to choose a king, in his words, a king of the woods, they would have chosen cannabis to be the queen of plants.
Le cannabis, comme la reine des plantes.